In the days that followed, Rome moved with a wary, deliberate calm that disguised panic. Senators avoided the forum or slipped through it with guarded eyes. Armed men loyal to Caesar's veterans watched corners and alleyways, unsure whether to avenge or to wait. In private houses, doors closed on hurried debates over precedent and law. The conspirators argued among themselves over whether they had struck down a tyrant or shattered the only force holding rival ambitions in check. Inside their meetings, they spoke the language of the old constitution. They cited the right to resist a dominus and the ancestral fear of kings, invoking the memory of Tarquinius Superbus as a warning brought to life. Yet each man had risen through offices that already bent those ancient restraints. Dictatorships extended beyond emergencies. Proconsuls commanded legions for years, and extraordinary grants of imperium blurred the line between magistrate and master. Their careers had flourished in the very loopholes they now condemned. In the Forum, the marble monuments revealed how deeply power had settled into single hands. Inscriptions praised individual generals for entire wars, listing provinces subdued under personal commands rather than under the collective will of the Senate and people. Statues of victorious imperatores towered above the rostra, where once only magistrates for a single year had stood. Citizens read decrees that bundled legislation, finance and military authority into the signature of one man, while still bearing the familiar initials SPQR. Stone streets filled with citizens as the New Year's magistrates paraded in strict order, each office hedged by limits and rivals. 2 consuls shared the highest command, their lictors bundled rods reminding all that coercive power ended with the year. Behind them, praetors passed in their bordered togas, entrusted with courts yet bound by precedent and the threat of appeal. Quaestors moved more quietly, hands on the city's ledgers, counting coin but not commanding troops. Censors, elected only rarely, reviewed rolls of citizens and equities, striking those who failed to meet property or moral standards, yet holding no armies and no permanent staff. Up the Capitol slope, the Senate assembled as a mass of former magistrates, their benches crowded with men who had already carried fasces or handled public funds. No senator issued orders in his own name, but decrees shaped wars, alliances, and taxes, exerting authority without formal executive command. On campaign, the balance of power remained visible even in the dust of marching columns. Each consul held half the legions, his decisions shadowed by his colleague and the prospect of later prosecution. Citizens condemned to death claimed provocatio ad populum, forcing magistrates to defend their judgments before an assembly. Yet when rumour brought word of invasion or revolt, the same institutions pivoted in a single meeting, empowering one man as dictator, with 6 months of near-absolute lawful command. In the middle of the 2nd century BCE, the lists of Rome's possessions lengthened as easily as a clerk's tally. Sicilia lay under Roman control, then Hispania Citerior and Ulteria, then Macedonia and the wealthy province of Asia. The same assemblies in the Forum elected the same annual magistrates, yet their writ now ran from the Atlantic shores to the mountains of Anatolia. No new central offices appeared. Instead, old titles stretched to cover new horizons. Men who had completed their year as consul or praetor departed again, now as proconsuls and propraetors, bearing imperium that no longer expired with the calendar. Prorogation, first introduced as a pragmatic answer to distant campaigns, extended their command by senatorial decree. They sailed from Ostia, entourages in tow, to govern territories larger than any Italian community had imagined. Officially, they served for a limited term. In practice, many remained until recalled, their authority renewed almost by habit. Roman statutes forbade these governors from declaring wars on their own or enlarging their mandates, yet geography favoured quiet disobedience. Couriers needed weeks to cross the sea. The Senate depended on the very men it supervised for information about distant frontiers. Reports arrived framed to justify decisions already taken in the field. Over time, the regularized cursus honorum, the clarity of command, and the routine of prorogation gave a small circle of former magistrates quasi-monarchical power over armies, treasuries, and provincial courts. In the years of Hannibal's advance, Rome's streets had echoed with the clatter of mobilization while the institutions around them held firm. Consuls alternated commands, censors recalculated property lists to squeeze more revenue from land and trade, and the Senate summoned allied contingents from Italy and beyond. Shipyards along the Tiber turned out triremes and transports on a tight schedule, their timetables hammered out in committee rooms where magistrates argued, then recorded each decree in the official registers. When disaster struck at Lake Trasimene, senators and magistrates had moved with practiced speed. They appointed a dictator, Quintus Fabius Maximus, who received sweeping authority to levy troops, redirect taxes, and overrule collegial vetoes. His policy of shadowing Hannibal, burning crops ahead of him, and refusing pitched battle angered many, but his powers remained strictly time-bound. As his term expired, his lictors laid down the fasces, and the Republic resumed its dense web of checks, assemblies, and annual offices. Years later, the same machinery elevated Publius Cornelius Scipio with a special command in Spain, and then Africa, ratified by popular vote. Senate committees evaluated grain stocks, transport capacity, and recruitment quotas, then funneled men and money to his legions. His decisive victory at Zama ended the Second Punic War and showcased how an individual could wield vast, legally sanctioned power. Each success, carefully recorded in law and precedent, made such concentrated commands easier to grant again. Wealth flowed into Rome on a scale no one had planned for. Shiploads of grain, bullion, and captured people arrived from Sicily, Spain, and the Hellenistic East, feeding an economy that rewarded size and connections. Latifundia spread across the Italian countryside, worked by chained or closely watched gangs of slaves. Former citizen soldiers, once the backbone of Rome's infantry, returned to find their small plots swallowed by neighbours with capital and senatorial patrons. Many of these dispossessed farmers drifted toward the city, crowding into insulae that leaned precariously over the alleys of the Subura. Above them, on the Palatine, elaborate villas displayed columns, mosaics, and Greek bronzes purchased with provincial spoils. In the Senate House, experienced magistrates and committees directed this flow of money through contracts with publicani, whose agents squeezed cities and countryside alike. The quaestio de repetundis, intended to restrain governors, often functioned as a shield for them. Senators sat in judgment over fellow senators, weighing charges brought by provincials against the prestige of Roman officeholders. Acquittals were common, reputations survived, and fortunes grew. The plebeian tribunate, once the refuge of debtors and the poor, had become another step in the cursus honorum, increasingly occupied by men from the same ruling houses. Formal powers remained, but daily practice bent toward compromise with the elite, leaving resentment to harden in the streets and assemblies below. Along the frontiers, lines of tents and weathered shields marked the new shape of Roman power. Men who once would have stood behind market stalls or pushed ploughs now drilled in tight formations, their armour issued from public arsenals rather than bought from family savings. Service had become a livelihood. In smoky campfires' glow, veterans weighed their futures not in terms of elections or magistracies, but in acres of promised land and the favour of the man who commanded them. When that man rode past, centurions snapped to attention and the ranks stiffened with a loyalty that felt almost devotional. Marius, Sulla, Pompey, and later Caesar each moved at the centre of such disciplined masses, their reputations burnished by victories and Senate-granted honours. The legal grant of imperium, renewed and extended by decrees, allowed the same general to lead the same legions year after year, until habit and hope fused soldier and commander into a single political force. Inside Rome, magistrates counted votes under the memory of those forces encamped beyond the Pomerium. The sacred line still barred armed soldiers from entering, yet tales of marching eagles and unbeaten cohorts coloured every debate. Assemblies hesitated when a popular general's wishes were known, and candidates weighed policies against the risk of offending distant camps. Triumphs paraded victorious commanders through cheering crowds, confirming that the surest path to authority now ran through the loyalty of professional legions. At Nola in 88 BCE, tents, standards, and siege engines all pointed east toward Mithridates, yet the man in command abruptly reversed their direction. Orders ran down the line. Centuries faced about, not toward a foreign frontier, but toward Rome itself. The commander held a valid consular imperium, granted in due form, and he claimed that the popular vote transferring his command to a rival had violated the very fabric of law he now marched to protect. When the legions entered the city, they moved along streets that had never seen Roman soldiers under arms. Resistance scattered. The clash of iron in alleys replaced the clamour of civic debate. Opponents' names appeared on lists, posted and read aloud as prescription notices, each one turning a citizen into an outlaw. Yet the remaking of institutions followed familiar procedures. Assemblies met, magistrates presided, and statutes extended the Senate's role while cutting the powers of the tribunes. In later years, other men stepped into powers that earlier generations would have deemed impossible for a single citizen. Popular assemblies voted the Lex Gabinia, placing the struggle against Mediterranean piracy under one commander with sweeping authority over seas and coasts. The Lex Manilia widened that control to eastern wars and provinces. When the Lex Vatinia and its renewals granted a long provincial command in Gaul, the path from annual magistracy to near monarchical rule already lay paved within the law. In the last decade before the Republic's fall, politics condensed around a handful of men whose careers had been amplified by the very offices they held. Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus did not abolish institutions, they leveraged them. Their private agreement bound together the consulship, provincial commands, and vast financial networks into a single, coordinated enterprise. Senate sessions unfolded, popular assemblies voted, but major outcomes had already been settled in rooms where only a few voices counted. As Caesar's Gallic command neared its end, arguments over his right to stand for the consulship in absentia revealed how procedural precision had become a battlefield. Tribunes' vetoes, once shields for the powerless, now stalled or advanced measures at the behest of rival factions. Emergency decrees, the Senatus Consulta Ultimas, framed opponents as threats to public safety. Even the assignment of provinces, a routine administrative task, served as a weapon to isolate or empower specific commanders. On a winter day in 49 BCE, when Caesar led a single legion across the Rubicon, he invoked legal formulas and appeals to dignitas to justify what amounted to armed negotiation. The war that followed, from Pharsalus to Munda, pitted Roman citizens against one another with forces raised under impeccably legal commands. These armies existed because governors had been granted broad powers to tax, recruit, and reward abroad. Now those same structures financed marches on Italian soil and decided the fate of the Republic itself. In the months after Caesar's death, the city still carried the outward rhythms of the old order. Magistrates convened assemblies, lictors cleared the streets, and senators debated under painted ceilings. Yet behind these familiar scenes, the Lex Titia in 43 BCE created the Second Triumvirate, granting Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus consular powers in a single collective. Decrees, once the product of rival institutions, now flowed from a board of 3, sealed with the authority of statute and ritual. Prescriptions followed in carefully recorded lists, posted in public spaces, and read aloud to murmuring crowds. Names of senators and equites appeared in ink, then in blood, as hired killers and opportunistic rivals hunted them across Italy. Confiscated estates passed into new hands under scrupulous legal forms, stamped and archived. Cicero, who had once praised the mixed constitution, fell to executioners acting under valid commands. The machinery of law, once a shield, now functioned as an efficient weapon. Armies decided what remained unresolved in courts and assemblies. At Philippi, Perusia, and Naulochus, organized legions, not voters, determined whose claims survived. With opponents eliminated, Octavian accumulated offices through regular elections and senatorial decrees, assuming multiple consulships, tribunician sacrosanctity, and the dignified role of princeps senatus. In 27 BCE, as Augustus, he ceremonially yielded special powers only to receive lifelong proconsular imperium and tribunician authority, leaving all institutions visibly intact, yet practically subordinate to a single will. In the early Republic, layers of restraint had defined public life. 2 consuls shared power, vetoes crossed tribunician and magistrate lines, and short, fixed terms broke up ambition into fragments. Citizen soldiers returned to their farms when campaigns ended, and emergency measures expired with the danger that justified them. Each safeguard answered an older trauma: kingship, aristocratic domination, civil strife, by making it difficult for any single will to govern the state for long. Over time, the same mechanisms that dispersed authority also allowed it to pool. Prorogued imperium kept generals in command to finish distant wars. Repeated senatus consulta ultima gave legal cover to extraordinary coercion in the city. Special commissions bypassed normal courts to handle urgent crises. Each adjustment solved an immediate problem in provincial control, grain supply, or urban security. Yet every exception that worked became a precedent, and every precedent made the next concentration of power easier to justify. By Augustus's day, the familiar offices still operated, but their center of gravity had shifted. The princeps held tribunician power without holding the tribunate, proconsular imperium without a provincial governorship, and long terms in command without formal dictatorship. Magistrates swore loyalty, senators debated measures already agreed upon, and assemblies approved laws drafted elsewhere. Order prevailed, violence subsided, and institutions functioned with such effortless precision that alternatives to centralized rule hardly seemed imaginable.